Okay, we're recording now. Before we really start, I need to cover a few technical matters for those of us who are unfamiliar with Zoom. First of all, if you want to change how the images appear on your screen, take your cursor up to the upper right-hand corner, and you have a choice between gallery view, which is affectionately known as the Brady Bunch view, or active speaker, which means that whoever's speaking, like me, will be larger than everybody else. I also want to let you know that at the bottom left corner of your screen, you have the capacity to mute your microphone. And that's probably a good thing to do, except during the question and answer periods. That way we won't hear background noise or anything like that. There will be a few minutes after each speaker and after the panel discussion at the end for questions. At that point, of course, unmute your mics. If you click on the chat icon, that's a little to the right of the middle of the bottom of your screen. You'll see the chat function come up, and at the top of that, you'll see that you have the capacity to raise your hand. So if you'd like to ask a question, raise your hand. That's one option with your chat screen open. Or alternatively, send a chat message to everyone or to Sara, Leonard, or to me. We're moderating. Or if nobody else is talking, you can use the old-fashioned way and just speak up. I also want to alert you that we are recording this. That's, I understand, a legal requirement and also a matter of etiquette. We want you to know that you're being recorded for posterity. So those are my announcements, and with that, I will hand off to Ramona Baker.
Hello, my name is Ramona Baker, and I am the director of the Master of Arts in Arts Administration program at Goucher College, and I'm delighted to welcome you. If this is your first time, this webinar has been organized by Marcia James and Sara Leonard and involves 3 of our special alums who will each be talking about how they have navigated their career through arts administration, and will give all of us share some of their wisdom and advice. There'll also be questions and answers, Q&A opportunities for everybody. At the end of the webinar, my email will show up, as will the web address for the program. Just in case you don't get to stay to the end, my email is Ramona, R-A-M-O-N-A, .Baker, B-A-K-E-R, @goucher.edu. So if you have any questions, just shoot me an email and I'll help you find it. Thank you. And let's see, now I'm turning this over to Sara.
Good evening, everyone. We're really glad that you're all here to join us for the kickoff to what we hope will be a series of regular webinars featuring some of the great thinking of our faculty and staff and students. Faculty, alumni, and students in the Goucher Master of Arts and Arts Administration program. I want to introduce you to our first speaker tonight, Laura Stetler. She graduated from our program in 2014, and Laura is going to share with us about her experience of realizing the adventure when place comes first. So Laura, with that, I will turn it over to you. And when Laura's finished, we'll have the opportunity for some questions. So if you do have questions while she's speaking, as Marcia said, either drop that into a chat or just hang on to it and we'll get back to you when she finishes the presentation part.
Awesome, thank you, Sara. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and hopefully we can transition this rather smoothly. So you should be seeing some slides here. Everybody got that in front of them? Awesome.
Yes.
I am thrilled to be talking with you about adventure and how different places can refine your approach and pathway as an arts administrator. So in reflecting on this, it readily became apparent that I have been a lot of places in recent years. You'll see the list in front of you there. And in particular, the last 5 were not necessarily my choice. I had some influence, but I was a trailing spouse as a military spouse. And so I definitely can speak to some of the challenges without necessarily sanitizing them, but some of the things that have come out of continuing my journey as an arts administrator in each of these locations. So underneath all of those places, what I have found is that we're tapping into our resilience, or on rough days, like sometimes today might have been for some of us, the ARG factor. And that R will come back in many themes that I'm going to share with you tonight. But in reality, this is a practice. It is a process of going through opportunities sometimes that are with discomfort, but that build us as individuals, but also arts administrators, and oftentimes change us, and sometimes even for the better. So the first couple of themes I want to share based on all of these locations are the opportunities to reflect on a place, what sort of chapter it's been in your life, what did you like about it, what do you want to take forward in your life, and then also the setting of intentions to reveal that this process of a new place or leaving a place for whatever reason is an opportunity to face expectations we have about our priorities, our wants and hopes, and then also an amazing process to go through as far as grief, whether that's about our professional change or things that we are potentially releasing and leaving behind. So for me, this next theme of releasing really comes down to how hard am I gripping those reins? Am I allowing myself to release a little bit on the reins to embrace the new opportunities, the changes that may come in a new place? And so for me, oftentimes, it's not necessarily about saying goodbye, but until we meet again. So a good example is I went to school in Boston here, and this is my first time getting to come back to New England in over 10 years. And so I'm very excited about that. This is also a chance to release expectations of doing it all yourself. So the next theme I'm going to share with you is recalibration. Oftentimes, such a huge transition as relocation really can put us off kilter. And I find that there's an amazing opportunity to be the executive director of your self-care and figure out what elements need to go into that and making sure that that happens. So for me, oftentimes, that's after a couple days of complete nebulousness, beginning to build my new routine. Maybe that means going and getting a library card and finding one of the pulse centers of your new community, sort of like we did in cultural ecosystems in the program. Sometimes that means really getting to know the new person who's cutting your hair, and if they've been in the community for a long time, what they can offer in terms of referrals, or the hardware store, wherever it may be. So taking care of things, but also making sure that the errands and the care you're taking with yourself is an opportunity to learn about the new place you're in. In addition to that, one of the questions that I find myself often asking is, what is the heartbeat of this place? What's the rhythm? What's going on? How has this community been built? And as a result of that, what analysis can I make about the opportunities that exist for me here? If my exact job can't be replicated, what opportunities exist? In Spain, where I most recently lived near an installation, one of the opportunities was to be a music instructor. With massive language barriers, this was a need that, though I fought initially, once I took the step to become a violin teacher here, broke open so many opportunities for me in this community. It really was an opportunity to contract with the government and learn about that process and basically have a business incubator for 2.5 years. Another opportunity was to continue using my education skills as a federal employee, getting to teach all sorts of enrichment programs to active duty, their families, retirees, even some local nationals. So this was amazing, getting to talk to people about their hopes and dreams, and there was lots of artistic conversation to be had. And of course, there is the actual place you're in. So in addition to reframing, part of that reframing is taking the time to experience the wonder of a place you're in, because it can look so different based on what you're bringing to it, day or evening. This is the same bridge in Cordoba, Spain. So with all of those themes in mind, sometimes the way you come into a community is not the way that you leave it. You may be surprised by the reach and the impact you have, where you end up doing your work. For me, one of these examples was actually getting to go and teach on a ship out in the middle of the Mediterranean. And that was an amazing, life-changing experience for me. In addition to that, you may be surprised at the opportunities where your chance to re-engage and bring arts and administration into your work shows up. Same work trip, teaching, later in the day after the other workshops. So the real question for me always comes down to, what can I do with what I've got here? And how can I enjoy this process? Because that will draw people in for entry points. Those are the main themes I wanted to share with you tonight, because I found they're important to hang on to and to revisit. Yet another R. And I would love to know where you are in realizing your adventure and which of these themes resonates the most with you. Sara, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Laura. I cannot see everyone's face at the same time, but if you'd like to type in a question, please feel free. If you'd like to just jump in and ask, you can feel free to do that. We'll take just a couple of minutes for questions now, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask questions again at the end of all of the presentations tonight. Everybody mulling?
I'm wondering if people realize that they're muted.
Let's find out. Now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Now we can.
Okay. So Laura, you used the word resilience, and I must admit that I am not as comfortable with change as you seem to be. So I'm sort of wondering, is this willingness to accept the amount of change and it's pretty rapid in your life. You're not that old to have been in those many. Is that something that you've learned, or you think it's innate? Because if it's learned, I'd like to learn it.
I definitely think it's a practice. And by that, I mean, I'm not dodging your question. I think it can be learned. Each transition is very different. And so it's sort of keeping one foot in the wisdom you've acquired and the practices you know work for you, and then also keeping one foot in the present and reading the situations you're going in. So I find it's always a balancing act. and there are certain ingredients that I can anticipate, and then I have to leave enough room for things to go pretty wonky. And that can happen in a lot of different areas. So I would definitely say it's a practice and it's developed. And for me, a big part of it has been shifting from thinking I have to do it all myself to allowing others to help. And that has eased my transition into a new community. Instead of feeling like I need to go and do everything and find everything, actually relying on people in that new community and being open and vulnerable about being a new person in that community has changed. And it's taken me 3 moves to get to that point. So I absolutely think it's learned. And especially if you see someone doing it well, kind of looking at what they're doing, how they approach that, and then borrowing that.
Yeah. Well, I think it makes you particularly good candidate for a job in arts administration because of how rapidly things change in the arts and how many crises we seem to be able to gen up on any given day. So I commend you for this ability.
Thank you. Thank you. I had no idea, like, you forget that it's not everybody's normal, but yeah. I mean, underlying it is a skill set that I think is helpful in any number of situations, not just relocation, but
yeah,
weathering storms.
Yeah.
Laura, thank you so much. It was a great presentation, and Greg, thanks for the question. Laura, I think we're still sharing your screen.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Deidra Montgomery. She received her Master's in Arts Administration in 2015, and she'll be speaking to us on the subject of growing where you are. Deidra, you're muted.
Yes.
Thank you. That's much better.
Okay. Good evening. So I started at NEFA, the New England Foundation for the Arts, which is currently where I'm currently employed as a development associate in 2014, while I was a student in Goucher's Master of Arts and Arts Administration program, from which I graduated in 2015. And something I've been able to do in the almost 4 years I've been at NEFA, and also in the time before I came here, is just thinking about growing within a given position. I think most of us have entry-level jobs at some point. And so I wanted to speak sort of from a perspective of how to prepare for the next step. So since we're talking about paths in arts administration, I thought I'd show you mine. I started out in a way that felt to me to be agonizingly slow before proceeding on a relatively straightforward art-centered path, with something of a detour in that 2013 to 2014 period. But it turned out to be so rich and so valuable and helped me remember sort of that I can do anything, which sounds pretty cheesy, but is really at the heart of this whole presentation. This invitation to remember that no matter your position, you are fundamentally worthy and capable, even when you feel stuck or underappreciated. And here are some big ideas that I have about ways to manifest that externally and develop professionally, even when there may not be built-in opportunities for you. So those are to lead from your seat, to find and fill gaps, to do what you love and what interests you, and to make organizational contacts personal. So when I say lead from your seat, I really mean that no matter what your position in a hierarchy, you can make change in your organization and you can make an impression on your colleagues, demonstrating positive leadership characteristics regardless of whether you are seen as being in a leadership role. Ask if the single-use restroom can have a gender-neutral sign rather than the one that reads men and women. Inquire about keeping art in the room by hanging some on the organization's bare walls. Change those spreadsheet templates that you inherited and make them clearer and more eye-catching. Your colleagues, or at least your supervisor, will notice, and you can reference this initiative in future reviews and job interviews. It can also make your job more interesting. So take every opportunity to provide ideas and feedback in ways that encourage people to be receptive to it and show interest in your organization beyond your specific role. Be curious and ask important strategic questions. So that leads to finding and filling gaps. So this is an opportunity to ask if there are organizational goals that don't fit into any department or staff role, because that might be an opportunity for you to branch out of your official role and contribute to the organization in a way that is not yet part of your job description. Of course, note that until you officially get your job description changed, this work will need to be done in addition to everything else you're expected to do. But participating in external conferences and committees or taking on projects internally may positively impact your work environment and will be an opportunity for you to make connections and acquire expertise that you did not previously have in areas of interest. So a concrete example that I have of this has been in the realm of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. A couple of years ago, though my title was development coordinator and nothing in my job description mentioned work related to equity, I made a case for attending the Summit on Race and Equity in Boston. I argued that it was a relatively inexpensive convening, that I could bring back tools that would benefit the organization, that it would make a positive impression in the field to have representation there, and that there was no one else who could do it, just because of timing. I attended, had a rich experience, deepened relationships, reported back, and led a brown bag lunch conversation that helped to reinvigorate the organization's intention to address issues of equity while sharpening my facilitation skills. Do what you love and what interests you. These opportunities to learn and grow in ways that make you better prepared to make moves within or without of your organization don't only happen in the office. I have learned at least as much about facilitation and public speaking from my spiritual community as I have from my work in the arts. And when shifting from development to programs, it mattered that I was involved with art in the public realm outside of work, that I helped organize a festival, and had artistic and administrative contacts who could help spread the word about our program. Our cognitive toolboxes are made up of all of our experiences, and diversity of experience matters. And through hobbies and community, we build and sharpen skills, we demonstrate commitment, we plan and execute projects, and we meet and make impressions on people who don't care what positions we hold at the places that employ us. Make organizational contacts personal contacts. Speaking of people, this is not an endorsement of transactional relationships. It's really a reminder, as it can sometimes be easy to forget that our colleagues in arts administration are also human beings who can be vulnerable and ambitious and unsure, just like we can. You may meet them as funding partners, as faculty members, as supervisors, stakeholders, panelists, applicants, but they might become mentors and advocates. They might become the folks who invite you onto boards and committees. They might be your future job references or collaborators. And they might just become your friends. Folks who understand the complexities of your work, who you can trust and rant to after a particularly tough day, or who tell you it's time to move on and send you any enticing job listings that come across their desks, or who encourage you to go to grad school and explain why theirs is the best. We're finding our paths in arts administration alone and together. We can be gentle to ourselves and kind to others. So here's my email address in case you'd like to be kind to me or talk more. Thank you.
Thank you, Deidra. That was fantastic. Are there any questions for Deidra? We have a couple of minutes.
I have a question.
Robert.
Could I unmute? Yeah. Hi, Deidra. How are you?
I'm well. Good to see you,
Wonderful to
Robert.
see you. Hi. I don't remember. Remind me, are you, I know Amherst is sort of in the middle of Massachusetts, but clearly you seem to really like that mid-Massachusetts to Boston corridor. Are you particularly rooted there and there by choice because you love it, or for the right opportunity, could you be tempted to go somewhere else? Or, you know, what's your story of the upcoming years?
That's a great question. Before moving here, I moved around for jobs. I was willing to go anywhere. And after the contract with the first job I moved here for ended, and I didn't have anything lined up, I decided I liked it so much that I wanted to stay. And that's where that temp paralegal part came in.
Oh, right.
That I really wanted to stay here. And so I made it work until I could find another job in arts administration. But I think for the right opportunity, I would consider going. Yeah, it's tough because I love it and it feels so manageable as compared to a place like New York, and because I really feel like I've built something here and continue to build something, but that can be as much an encouragement to stay as an excuse not to leave.
Right.
And so I try to hold all of that together. So it feels like I'm avoiding the question, but it's difficult in a sort of hypothetical space. I would have to see what was possible.
Right. If the great adventure presents itself to you, I do speak from a couple of years older than you experienced, that it becomes only harder to make those kinds of moves as you get older, or if you have kids and relationships or whatever. So if there's a great adventure, grab it, because you might be able to do it more easily now than in 20 years.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks. Are there any other questions for Deidra? Okay. If not, Sara, back to you. Thank you, Deidra.
Thank you so much, Deidra. I got to know Deidra when she was an undergrad at Amherst, and she's knocked my socks off ever since. Speaking of people who knock my socks off, Joe Gleason is our next speaker. Joe is a graduate of the program from 2013, and he has a remarkable path that has led him there and back again. And he's going to talk with us about the choice to change careers and when we accept that challenge. So Joe, unmute yourself and join us.
All right, I've unmuted myself, and can everybody hear me? Okay, Deidra nodded, so that's good. Mine's a bit of a personal journey, and I hope to weave in a couple of things along the way. Let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen. And I think I want to share that. And hit share screen.
Mine is at the very bottom.
Okay. From the beginning. So we should see a slide up on the screen. I only have a couple of motivational quotes for you guys. So like Laura, my background, my dad was in the service, so I'm not unfamiliar with changing place and moving it seems like every 6 months when I was a kid. So I carried that feeling of change with me as a kid growing up. I do think that you learn it, although when you start as young as I did, maybe you learn it a lot faster. So change has never been a scary proposition to me. So when I got out of college, I started in theater because that's what I love doing. But every job I had, I didn't view it as I'm going to be at this theater for 20 years. It was always, what's the job I'm doing? I'm liking what I'm doing here. What's the next opportunity? So I tended to move on every couple of years. And that's very difficult to find your place when you're constantly changing that place. But theater was the constant in my life. When I started a family, and Robert's right about that, you have a little more freedom to move around when you're younger and unencumbered by family, particularly when you start having kids. But after the birth of our first child, I actually switched careers. I got burned out of theater work, surprisingly enough, maybe not. Technical direction, theater takes its toll on family life. So I ended up moving into construction, and that's actually where I found my first mentor. And the reason that came about was the general contractor I ended up working for was out of the blue. The theater I had just left was going under a renovation, and they hired me. And so I ran the renovation project for the general contractor, and they put me on another job where it actually required real knowledge of construction instead of renovating a theater. And you can imagine that didn't go quite as well for me. But I stuck my hand up and said, I can learn on the job. I'm pretty good at that, but I don't want to lose money for the company. I realize my limitations, and I think it's important that you speak up when you're having difficulty in a job. And to their credit, they hooked me up with a more experienced job foreman, and that person became my mentor throughout the 3 years I worked for that construction company. And I learned a lot from that person, and even as I grew and started doing my own projects with the company, I always could rely on him as someone to go to gain advice about how to handle particular situations. Anyway, as you might imagine, I grew tired of construction work, and I ended up back in theater. And this is why it's there and back again, but it's there and back again, and then away and then back again. So I won't bore you with the details, but I worked in theater for quite a while, went on tour, and then we had a third child, okay? So you make the choice. So it's about change, and I'll change to my next slide because change is done now. Now we're all about choice. The choices you make determine the paths that you take. And sometimes you're on the right path and you realize it and you stay there, and other times it takes a while to realize that you're on the wrong path. So when I had my third child, I went into the world of IT, and I was quite good at it, I thought, although it didn't have the fun factor and the creative aspects that I found so enjoyable and passionate about in the arts world. So after 15 years, and believe me, this is the longest I ever stayed at any one job or in any one place in my life, cannot believe I did it, I realized I was in a rut. And if I did not escape, I felt my soul was being crushed in this job. Sure, the money was great and all of that, but I really needed to get back to theater. And grad school was one of the furthest things from my mind. And I said, I'm going to start applying for jobs, which I did. And I found that my experience in theater, while it was quite large, was also quite old. I had been out of the business for 15 years. And so I set myself a deadline and said, if I can't land a job in theater doing something I want to do, I will go back to school. And through Matt Cahoon, who's also an alum of Goucher, I believe that's where I actually learned about Goucher, and looked up the deadline for submitting the essay, which was probably the first paper I had to write in like 30 years. Just feels like that long. And I ended up applying, getting into the program. I got to say, it's got to be one of the best moves of my life. Ramona reminds me so much of one of my theater bosses that I still, when I look at you, Ramona, I see one of my former bosses, MT Menino, who meant the world to me, was a great mentor. But anyway, not to bore you anymore, my path back into the arts began with Goucher, and I thought I had it all figured out. I was going to complete the degree program, then I would work towards finding another position. But, you know, change is easy for me, and I kept looking at job opportunities, and I saw one. And when I applied, my wife prodded me into doing it. And I got the job. It was out at Clayton Opera House in upstate New York. They took me on as an executive director, which was a new role for me. And through Goucher's experience, and I was still in my first year, I really felt that I had a new bunch of brains to pick. My classmates, who were wonderful, the upperclassmen like Sara, and the faculty like Greg and Marcia and all the rest. It was just a fantastic experience. I felt alive again, quite frankly. And, you know, if you're older in life and trying to make a career change, it can be scary. Even if you're younger in life, making a career change, that can be scary, but you just have to go for it, I think. And embrace the fact that you've got to take a leap of faith sometimes and take on a new challenge and not be afraid to do so. It worked out for me. I'm happy it did. I'm happiest doing what I am right now. Hey, that's my timer. I'm almost done. I just wanted to share this photo. I'm down, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving. I'm here in the lower right corner. That's me from 1995 in the theater that I'm actually in right now. I came back home. So it was a long journey, and oh, here's Ramona. Ramona, this is MT Menino. She reminds me so much of you, both in personality and in looks. Wonderful thing. Anyway, and this is the lovely building that I get to call home every day. I come here, and my office is right over in this area. So I just feel blessed to be back in the business, doing things that I love, working to make this community that I'm in, which is Concord, New Hampshire, hopefully a better place through bringing them arts and culture, and really just enjoying life to the fullest right now. I'm going to give up my screen. Look at that. All right, so I went a little longer than 8 minutes.
No problem. Thank you so much, Joe. I have a question from Lauren Klein. Lauren, do you want to ask it, or would you like me to?
Sure, I can ask it.
Okay.
I am wondering, hold on. I am wondering what recommendations you would have for someone who is sort of at the beginning of your journey with Goucher, looking to navigate the transition to switching careers, and also particularly how you marketed yourself and thought about putting together that transition.
Well, okay, so like I said, my original intent was to get into the program and either complete it or be pretty well along the way to completing it before I really started looking for my next home. I intended to stay in IT and work through the program remotely. When I established, went to that first residency, the first thing that came out of Ramona's intro class was, all about boards and, board service and, how to get on a board. And quite frankly, it's simple as asking. So I actually went back to the Capitol Center energized from my first residency, and I contacted the executive director here and basically set up a meeting and said, do you have any openings on the board? And sure enough, someone was moving out of the area and they had a spot and they put me on the board. I was like, fantastic. So that's where it started for me. I was anxious to leave IT. The work, 15 years, it's an awful long time for someone that's used to changing every year or two. And I'm surprised I lasted that long without it putting me in my grave. So I'm exaggerating, okay. So that transition, know what you want to do. I knew I wanted to take on a leadership role in an arts organization. I did not want to go back to production. I thought at my stage in life, and I had gone through, being a technical director, facilities manager, director of operations. And had I stayed in theater, I thought, well, I will just keep going up the chain and maybe be an executive director, someday. So when I left for 15 years, that option was, cut short. And I wasn't sure I could go straight to executive director from Goucher, but as it turned out, those little small theaters can be good opportunities. And I loved my time in New York, 2 years. You just have to know when you're ready to change. And, everybody's situation is different. So financial considerations are part of it. For me, my 3 kids were not quite grown. My youngest was still in high school when I moved. And it was actually a very challenging period of my life for a lot of other reasons. But everything worked out great in the end. I think the move back re-energized me in a way that was good for me. So I don't know if that even came close to answering your question. But part of it is just do it. If you know you're ready for a change and you're just kind of stuck and you're not enjoying your job, and I think both Laura and Deidra mentioned this, do what you love. And if what you are doing every day of your life to earn money, to make a living, is not fulfilling, just because it's financially rewarding, take the chance and go do something that's more fulfilling personally. The money will work itself out. So,
I think the other part of Lauren's question that I heard was if you were moving from, as you did, from production to administration or hoping to make that move, now that you're on the other side of it, if you were looking at a resume that came into you, now I'm putting words in Lauren's mouth, but if you were looking at a resume that came into you, what would you be looking for in someone looking to make that move? Is there a way to talk about your experience to help parlay it in, or is it the luck of finding a resume reader who understands what the technical world is and what that transition could look like?
I think if you're applying to a larger organization or an institution that has a formal HR department and your resume ends up there, you're not going to have great success. But if you're in a applying at a smaller arts organization in your town where your resume is actually going to be looked at by, an executive director or a department director at least, most of us, I don't know. Well, I don't know. For me, when I look at a resume, if I'm looking for a marketing manager, for instance, it's helpful, yes, if you've dealt with the media before, and if you know any kind of graphic design, you have to know the programs. But those are technical skills that can be learned. So I don't care if you're not up to the most recent program, as long as you've got an attitude and a work ethic that comes across in the interview. I just don't discount the resume because it doesn't seem relevant experience-wise. I look at the positions that you've held, and if there's any kind of growth over time, then I know that you've made an impact in an organization and or you've moved up a step or two. If you're still at the very beginning level and you reach too far, you might not have enough experience to back it up. If you were 2 years into a Goucher program, that would count though. I mean,
Any other questions for Joe?
Laura's hand is up.
Oh, Laura.
So I just wanted to jump in and tag team with Joe on that in terms of the resume bit, because that was a really fun area to work in at the organization I worked at, Fleet and Family. So I saw a lot of people transitioning out of the military. And I would say, I would second his sort of target your approach towards certain types of organizations that you think you're going to get looked at, but also your ability to speak about your underlying skill sets. Like he mentioned, attitude and sort of some of these skills that maybe are less technical, but if you can also kind of peel back the layers on your experience in terms of the underlying skill set, whether it's communication or navigating conflict or program analysis, or kind of digging into what you worked with in terms of bringing your previous work and experience into play, but also the lens through which the organization is looking to bring someone on. So I would say being able to kind of read that announcement really carefully and see what they're asking for underneath the position, and then being able to speak to that through your work experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's great. Joe, thank you for a fabulous presentation, and Lauren for a great question, and Laura for adding into that answer. We're going to spend the last 15 minutes of the hour in a panel discussion, and I'll be asking the first question, and then you're all invited to chime in with questions or with answers if you want to participate in the answering side as well as the questioning side. So the first question is about mentorship. I think all of you have mentioned it. How important is it to have a mentor? How do you find a mentor? And once you've found one, what do you do with him or her? And I'll turn that over to the three of you. Laura, you're muted. And well, Deidra's muted too.
I'll jump in. As I mentioned, my first experience with a mentor was essentially a coworker at a construction company where I was in over my head, and the company, I think, at least recognized that they didn't just want me to throw me to the side and put me on some menial thing, but they paired me up with someone that knew a little more. So the initial mentorship there was really hands-on, working with day by day. But as we grew, I took on more responsibility as I learned more, and I was running my own jobs. But I kept that relationship going with him, and I think we enjoyed bouncing ideas off of each other. It's not just a one-way street. It's not the person that goes to the mentor for all the answers. It's actually a professional relationship. Usually the mentor's got more experience and, has maybe a little more to offer, but I think bouncing new ideas off of someone that's been in the field for a long time can also open their eyes. So it's positive when it works to both parties' advantage, I think.
Laura?
Yeah, I've unmuted myself. I agree with Joe. There's definitely reciprocity there. I would also say there are a couple of things about that piece. Mentorship to me sometimes feels like a fairly formal concept, and I think there are people in your life that you go to for certain things, and maybe it isn't until a couple later on you look back and you're like, oh, they were mentoring me in that area. But there can be sort of an informal as well as formal element to this. And so on the job, as Joe's talking about, feels a little bit more formal to me. But there are people that I think will see you and might even start mentoring you before you realize it's happening. They sort of push you along into your potential, help you invest in yourself in ways that maybe you didn't see. And so those are relationships to carry with you through whatever chapter, whatever location. And so they don't necessarily need to have like a determine the relationship talk. We're going to meet every 2 weeks or whatever, but then there's maintenance there of investing in that reciprocity. And another thing that often comes to my mind are qualities that you're looking for. So if you find that you really like someone's style or approach, getting in a position to see how they do that and understand that and encounter that, which of course requires availability. Okay, there have been times where I have wanted someone to mentor me, but they were not available, and it maybe wasn't the chapter for it or what have you. But in terms of approach and availability, those are two things that I think are really important, especially if you're looking for mentorship or guidance in a certain area.
Thank you. Deidra, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak a little bit to my experience with formal mentoring and how valuable it was, or what I later interpreted to be formal mentoring. And the importance of that for me really being the accountability piece, because I've had people mentor me who were my supervisors. Sara was one of those people. I had that in my first development position at NIFA, who really pushed me and give me opportunities to grow. But there was also a time when I was between jobs, when I was literally reporting to Ramona weekly what I was doing and how I was pursuing my job search, and having that account. And I would send her weekly reports, and she would reply, and just having that, I have so much gratitude for, and it's a little bit of a different version of it, and you can get really lucky and end up with that type of relationship and someone who will do that for you.
You know, I completely agree. At the risk of embarrassing Laura, I will say that I advised her major paper, and she in turn has spent the past several years really mentoring me as I try to write my doctoral dissertation. So one of you talked about reciprocity, and I'm getting much more than I ever put into it, especially in the way of a lifelong friend. So I'm very grateful and want to acknowledge her.
Well, that's sweet. I hope my camera's horrible enough you can't see me blushing. It's been an honor. I think those relationships, sometimes you see them early, and sometimes they develop along the way, because all of us have talked about chapters and having this moment of trying to figure out what we need, and reflection and revealing. And I go back to my R's all the time, but that would be a version of reaching out, asking people to come into your life in ways that will help you grow as an arts administrator, as a result of growing as an individual.
Any other thoughts there from our panelists or other guests? We can come back to it if something occurs to you. Otherwise, I'll ask another question. One of the things that I saw early on in my nonprofit career, actually before I switched into arts administration, was that, you know, many arts organizations, many nonprofits generally have a limit to their capacity for internal growth. There can come a point in your own career development where in order to take the next step, you have to leave because the next step doesn't exist. The organization jumps from program associate to director, and you need something in the middle that just isn't there at that organization. Or maybe my organization just doesn't like to promote from within. Maybe they like to bring in external folks. So do I stay? Do I go? And what are some signs to look for that maybe it is time to go, at least for a while? There's a lot of questions in that question. That's how I roll. If you'd like me to break them apart, I can.
Well, I guess I'm tempted to think of it in the context of what I spoke about. Like, it feels like having a stable place from which to do what is interesting and find ways that I can grow and contribute, or that one can grow and contribute. It can be really helpful when you're in a place that like has good benefits and you have good vacation and there's space to do, and there's flexibility and there's space to do what you want to do. But it's my experience in nonprofits where I've worked where things get very cyclical, and it feels like there are only so many cycles that you could go through, only so many ways to improve in each iteration. And it really, I don't know, for me, a big sign is just when your organization is really telling you that there is nowhere for you to go and nothing more for you to do in an implicit or explicit way. If you want to do more, then I say go.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Deidra. If you're happy there in the role you're in and not looking to go into the next level up, then there's no reason to leave. But when you are ready to move to that next level, if you can't do it within the organization that you're within, you owe it to yourself to go outside of that and find a place where you can make that growth. Otherwise, I think what happens over time is when you stay too long, and well, for me, I always like changing, but if you stay too long in one spot where you know that you want something more and you're not getting it there, you will grow to resent that place, or maybe not resent, but you will not get the same level of satisfaction and enjoyment and be putting forth your best effort in that location because you know you're being held back. And maybe it's because it's not because the organization is saying, no, we're going to hold you back, you can't grow more. There are smaller organizations that simply don't have a path for you to take. And when you're ready for that jump, you need to take it. Just, I'd say, go for it, because that's the way to do it.
I can jump in and speak to some signs as well. So that's sort of part of being executive director of your self-care or your own Funshine committee, what have you there. There are certain things you know about yourself. I tend to be sort of a workaholic. Like, I love to dive in and just, well, if you haven't figured it out, the math on that thing was that I was doing 2 jobs in Spain. So there we have it. But when you reach the point where your baseline has changed and you're sort of, I don't know, like you prefer going to the dentist instead of going into work that day. You have sort of a litmus for your joy and when something like that happens and you're realizing, something needs to shift, you're kind of back in that recalibration bit. Do I stay? Do I go? What do I need to weigh in order to either make this work for a certain amount of time or do I need to kind of start making a strategy towards growth? So, I mean, I think it's really predicated on knowing your signs, knowing how you're going to respond to them because you're in charge of them, and then also having a sense of what motivates you. If, for example, something in your organization changes and for example, growth is a motivator for you and things are taken out that don't allow for that, is there a way to adjust, or do you need to go somewhere where growth is valued and they use it to motivate people? So I think a lot of it is awareness, but also then, as a very wise person once told me, keeping your knees bent so that if you're realizing the shift needs to be made, you're in a position to know why.
Thank you. I'm just scrolling through here to see if there are any hands raised so I don't miss anyone. And do feel free to send a message to me or Marcia. Give it just a few seconds to see if anyone else has a question to add. Otherwise, we're getting very close to 9 o'clock Eastern here.
Hey, Sarah, can I add a comment in? This is Crystal.
Yes, please.
I don't have a hand raise option. Hey, everybody. I read the best quote about this the other day, and I can't remember where I found it, but it said something like, you're looking for someone to tell you the direction that you want to go, but the direction that you want to go is not a direction that anyone has gone before, or that the path that you're trying to get to, isn't something that it's not a formal box that you can kind of jump into. And I've really been thinking about that and in everyone's comments about being in a transitional space and trying to stay true to my artistic roots and what that should look like in a new town. So I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal.
All right, well, I will turn it back over to Ramona, our fearless director, to wrap us up for tonight.
I have really enjoyed this. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your sharing and your wisdom and your ability to really, it's one thing to do the work, but it's another to reflect on it and then be able to talk about it with others. And that's very generous of you. So I really appreciate what Sara and Marcia have done, but also I really appreciate Deidra and Laura and Joe sharing their well-earned wisdom with all of us tonight. It's going to show up on the screen again, but if you have a question for anybody, just email it to me and I'll forward it to them. My email is Ramona, RAMONA .Baker @Goucher, which is GOUCHER.edu. And another thing, as Sara and Marcia mentioned, this is the beginning of a series of webinars. We'll take a little holiday break and come back in February and plan to do February, March, April, and May, optimistically, I say. So if you have ideas for topics, please let us know. Again, email me or Sara, and let us know what you would like to hear about or talk about. Thank you. Sara, Marcia, give us a goodbye.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Goodbye, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. And now I'm going to put the screen up for more information.
Terrific. Thank you, everybody. It's great.
Have a wonderful night.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to see everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.